let's all relax. Let's all get a cup of coffee or hot chocolate or something, and we're going to learn about streaming together. And let me bring on my guest right now, Mario Stefanidis from Roundhill Investments. Mario, thanks for coming on. How are we doing?
We're doing good. And I love how you have Seinfeld in the background.
Hey,
is
thanks.
that because they're in Hulu right now, which is one of our portfolio companies, Disney?
No, it is not because of that. It is because we have a bunch of random. First of all, these aren't like fatheads, and they're not cardboard. They're like actual like hardwood, and we got them. And by we, I mean our CEO Jason Raznick got them at like a warehouse sale a few months ago.
Why are you lying to Mario? We got them because we knew you were coming on, Mario. Hulu is one of your portfolio companies. Exactly what you said, Mario. The rest
exactly what he said. Exactly what he said. No, prior to a couple of days ago, Mario, I'd only had the 4. But I found a Newman like 2 days ago. He was like hiding in the corner, so I was able to add Newman. So that was fun. Real quick, before we get started, I get made fun of this a lot. Pronunciation of your first name. Yeah,
it's a good question. So
thank you.
I call myself Mario. A lot of people call me Mario, but I think either works.
Okay, I just called you Mario, and I only did that because it's been beaten into me. But I always say Mario too. Okay,
I'm glad.
Thanks. So you're okay. You're from your lips to God's ears, Mario.
You're preaching to the choir.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to tell everyone I know that I've been right this entire time. I'm going to play this video for them, so they'll never live it down. All right, let's talk streaming. Let's talk Roundhill. You've got this new ETF. Gonna bring it up. I'll bring a chart up here on in a second. First off, the streaming ETF. How do you define streaming? Because I was going through the investor deck, and I guess you guys had a little bit of a different definition than I had considered before. So how do you define streaming?
Yeah, so in a nutshell, streaming is just the transmission of audio or video, or even both in some codecs, to an end user over the internet. And streaming really has taken on a lot of forms, and we're trying to capture all of those different sub-themes in our portfolio, not only across video, audio, health, even companies like Peloton, but also geographically as well.
So I hadn't considered, I don't know why, I hadn't considered the audio aspect of it before. Everyone thinks streaming, they all think video, right? They think Netflix, they think Hulu, they think Roku. I hadn't considered audio or really even like esports as part of that, but that's part of your universe?
Esports is not explicitly a part of our universe, but we do have streaming services that esports can be showed on. For example, 2 of our companies, Huya and Douyu, they're the 2 largest game streaming services in China, and they're both kind of doing the exact same thing, live streaming games to end users.
Right. So why create an ETF with specific exposure to streaming?
Well, we were kind of surprised when we were doing the research for it in the early stages that there was no other fund globally that just targeted streaming. And This is one of the hottest sectors, I think, in terms of people cutting the cord, in terms of people subscribing to services. You know, you saw the launch of Disney Plus that caused Disney's stock price to single-handedly double. There's clearly a lot of momentum around streaming right now. So we wanted to be out of the gate with the first streaming product, and we did a lot of work. We came up with the methodology for what we wanted to include, and a few months later, here we are. We just went live yesterday. We traded just north of 1 million shares, which is, we couldn't be more ecstatic about it. And today it looks like we're going to do just north of 1 million shares again.
When you say you figured out the methodology, what goes into that? Like when you're doing research on creating a fund, what goes into that?
So first we need to come up with a list of companies to include in our universe. And our universe ended up with maybe 2 or 3 times the names that are in the actual fund. And then the fun part is really taking all of those companies, deciding as a team if those companies are relevant to the theme of streaming, just how relevant they are, and if we're going to include them in the fund, what sort of weight do we want to assign to them? And all of that comes in the context of making sure we're diversified geographically and across, like you mentioned, audio, video, and all those other themes.
So let's talk about that exposure. Maybe we'll start with like the biggest names, the top 10, or maybe like how did you construct, well, I guess it tracks an index, right?
It's an active fund.
It's an active fund. Oh, man. Whoa. Ring the bell, everybody. We got an active fund on our hands. All right. Now we're talking. So then let's talk about, how did you go about constructing the basket?
So it's kind of active light in the sense that we're still going to continue to rebalance the fund quarterly. But I think being active really gives us discretion to add cool names intra-quarter into the fund to manage the liquidity of the fund. I think with some of the names we wanted to include, like Inke, for example, which is this Chinese video sharing company, they may not be liquid enough to facilitate the huge creates that we got on the first couple of days, for example, but they are liquid enough to trade over a multiple day period. So that's something active really affords us the luxury of doing.
And just looking at like some of the largest names, a lot of them to be expected, right? Netflix is the largest, or Netflix and Roku, I guess, are the largest holdings right now, followed by Spotify, Tencent Music. Then you've got some Asia exposure there, JStream, Disney's in there, Bilibili. Billy's in there, Fubo's in there. So some names I'm sure a lot of people have heard of, and some maybe that they haven't. How conscious of an effort was it to get different exposure to different countries and different emerging markets?
It was conscious for sure. And the way the fund is right now, it's about 50% US. It's about a quarter China, and the balance is in South Korea, Canada, Korea, and India, each with one name for each of those countries. You know, if we had it our way, we wish we could invest in other streaming services in other countries, but a lot of the US and particularly the US streaming services are multinational. So you are getting that exposure. I'll give you some example. Disney has Star, which is one of the largest streaming services in India. Some of the US names do indirectly give you that multinational exposure.
So you've got a 35 holdings. Was that like the magic number? You said you cut some out. What did you start with? And I guess why 35?
Well, I think the magic number is anywhere between 30 and 40.
Okay, why is that?
So you don't want to have too few names that you're not properly diversified and you're taking on a lot of idiosyncratic risk. But you also don't want to have too many names that your fund ends up looking like beta soup, as I like to call it, and you're not giving people targeted exposure to the theme. So when we narrowed it down, we definitely weren't going to include the same number of stocks that we had in our universe, but we also weren't going to trim it down excessively.
Yeah. When you're having conversations, I guess you've only just begun to have these conversations, but when you have conversations with investors, with institutions about the fund or with advisors, what is like the main selling point?
So we haven't had conversations with institutions yet. I'm sure, as you know, our company strategy is primarily to target retail audiences. You know, we really saw that day one. The average trade size for subs was just under 300 shares. So we had a very large retail audience buying on day one. But if the conversations were to come up with advisors or institutions, the main selling point is people in America are cutting the cord. Right now, only about 20% of American households have cut the cord, and that's a number that's going to continue to grow, I think, exponentially. And as more and more people subscribe to streaming services, these services not only are going to increase their market size, but they also have a lot of pricing power. You saw Netflix increase recently the price of their service by $1, and the price of the stock kind of shot up by what that means for revenue, like 6 or 7%. So these streaming services, especially if they have really good content on them, they're going to have large followings and they're going to have a lot of pricing power to increase their revenues going forward.
With a lot of these emerging technology funds, the argument a lot of times comes back to demographics, right? They say, oh, this is a demographics play. This is a planned demographics. This is the young people are doing this. Is this a demographics play, or is it just an everybody play?
I think it's an everybody play, but you're right. Especially the younger demographics are cutting the cord more than any other demographic. And as the older demographic kind of gets pushed out, that's another catalyst, I think, for streaming.
So talk about the rebalancing. You said it's quarterly, right? So every quarter you're going to go in, do your buys and sells, but at the same time, it's actively managed. So explain that, because we all know now, like the ARK Invest funds, they send an email out every day, right, with all their buys and sells. Is that the plan here, or still do the quarterly?
So we're exploring setting up some kind of system where we can notify people of our trades, but quarterly I think is going to be the primary cadence, but you can expect to see names trade intra-quarter as well. So quarterly we're just doing just to make sure everything is at the right weight. We don't want some stuff being disproportionately weighted to other things, but active also gives us the flexibility to make those decisions intra-quarter as well. I think it's just a lot more flexible approach for us to take and give our investors the best possible product.
Was it also like because there was just no index for you to track? I guess you could have made your own, but
yeah, we would, if we did go to the index route, we would have made our own.
Yeah.
Our other two ETFs, Nerd and Bets, are both self-indexed, where we come up with the names. But again, active is just more flexible.
All right. What names would people be surprised to see in the basket?
So one of my favorite names in the basket, which is in the top 10, is JStream. And this is a company not a lot of people know about, but they were the first company in Japan to offer streaming services. And by streaming services, I mean the content delivery network for companies to disseminate their streams, advertising services to monetize streams, kind of everything relating to the streaming ecosystem. And this is a really neat name because they have JStream as like kind of a holding company, and then they have 5 divisions that are all subject matter experts in different facets of the streaming universe. One of their subsidiaries, for example, is only keyed in on telemedicine. And this is a company that is currently exclusive to Japan, but I wouldn't be surprised if they start expanding internationally.
And this isn't traded in the US, right?
It trades in Japan, so we have a foreign holding in our fund.
And that right there is something that I haven't mentioned yet, but I would like to, is one of the advantages of ETFs is that if I wanted to buy JStream, I would have to go like set up a brokerage account in Japan and deal with like Forex conversions and pain in the butt, right? Giant pain in the butt. Or you can get exposure to JStream via via a fund like SUBZ, right? So it does the work for you in that sense. So yeah, I mean, you're not going to see JStream on your trading platform, on your Robinhood, your Webull, but there are other ways to get exposure. Right.
And these are names that, since we've slowly become experts in these names over time, these are individual holdings that we can provide people, we can diversify our fund, and people might not be aware of them, but we think they're going to have outsized growth.
So I mentioned you've got 35 holdings. I went through most of the top 10. Tell us like some of the other like lesser known names.
So Kuaishou was an IPO that just came out of China a couple weeks ago, and this is a really neat name. It's kind of like a hybrid of TikTok and Snapchat, where people are sharing short videos that they recorded to mass audiences. Snapchat is a neat platform, but in the end of the day, it's really one-to-one. You have stories, but they're really only being shared to your universe. This is a platform that allows short videos to go viral, similar to TikTok.
Someone just asked in the chat if there's options. Probably not. I mean, the fund is 1 day old.
Yeah, the fund is 1 day old. Where
give them a break, people. Come on. It's been on the market for 24 hours.
It's a good question. I mean, Bets had options 1 week after it was launched.
Right.
Hopefully we followed the same cadence, but
Dear
we're
Lord,
working on getting options.
Come on. No options, but you're working on it? Okay.
Yep.
All right, cool. What's the bear case here? For every bull case, there's a bear case. For every buyer, there's a seller. What is the bear case on streaming?
I think the bear case would be if cord cutting doesn't accelerate as fast as a lot of people think. If cable companies can somehow entice their users to not cut the cord and they start expanding their offering somehow, I guess that's one negative case for the fund, but I think it's just unlikely to happen. I think the acceleration to streaming is already well underway.
What kind of, and I know you're not giving specific investment advice, but like what kind of allocation do you think is appropriate? If that's even
100%.
appropriate. No, in all seriousness, if that's a question you can answer, I mean, like what kind of allocation do you think?
No, it's a good question. And
wait, hold that thought. Lisa Maria, the ticker is up on the screen. It's SUBZ.
It's a good question, and this is something that we expect. This is something that's definitely a growth name, right? It's not a value ETF. It's not a high dividend paying ETF, and you can expect to see some volatility, but maybe like 10% could be something prudent.
Yeah. What about the traditional cable names, right? I mean, could there ever be a time when they get included in the basket if they, I mean, they're all doing it. They're all creating their own streaming platforms, right? So could there be a time when the fund also includes Viacom and Fox and Charter and others?
I'll address Fox first. I mean, they sold most of their media holdings to Disney, so I don't think Fox would be included anytime soon. In terms of some of the other ones, AT&T and Comcast are both in the fund. Okay. But at small weights, they're at about a 1% weight. And AT&T obviously has HBO Max. They're expanding HBO Max left and right. They just announced a push into Latin America. A couple months ago, they announced that all movies released this year would go on HBO Max and into brick and mortar theaters concurrently. And then Comcast is behind Peacock, which is another streaming service that's growing pretty fast. So we're going to include those names, but only on the basis of thematic relevance to streaming. And that's why you won't see something like Verizon in there.
Can we talk about what moves these stocks? Netflix just had a pretty monumental earnings report where they said, all right, we've gotten to a point, we're more mature, we're cash flow positive, we're spending gobbles of money on content, but we're not trying to raise new money right now or issue new debt. And they've gotten to that point where they're transitioning into more of a mature company. But in Netflix's history, what's always made of the stock go is growth, right? Growth. They've gotten to a point now where maybe the growth rate is slowing down. So what moves these stocks higher, these streaming stocks? Is it just subscriber growth and that's the only number to pay attention to?
It's primarily top line growth. You're right. These names are all being invested in for their potential. But I mean, you look at Netflix, they have hundreds of millions of users. They've already kind of made it. And all they really have to do now is continue to monetize that existing user base. I think internationally is something that's really exciting too. Countries like India, people that do subscribe to streaming services aren't paying more than $1 or $2 a month. Like Disney Star is, I think, $2 a month when you convert from rupees. But I think as those markets grow, the freemium model will also grow in importance as well. A lot of these services are ad supported in these emerging markets. But again, it's still a relatively small portion of revenue. So you kind of have a lot of tailwinds going.
Someone asked what the expense ratio is. I just had it up in front of me, but now
it's 0.75%.
How do you come up with that number? Just out of curiosity.
I think that's competitive for other thematic ETFs, and our fund Bets, which is index charges 75. So we're kind of giving you index plus like exposure for the same price.
We're getting also questions about some of your other ETFs. Can you comment on other ETFs, on like bets, for example?
Sure. So bets is our sports betting ETF.
The specific question was potential catalysts. Sorry, potential catalysts for bets.
The big thing for bets is regulatory loosening. So right now, sports betting in the United States is still not legal at the federal level. Individual states have begun to legalize on kind of an a la carte basis. And as more and more states come into this ecosystem, particularly states that really need to shore up their revenues post-COVID, you're going to see the expansion of streaming. Even New York, which has been a key lobbying state for or sports betting, sorry. And I was going to say even New York, which has been a key state for sports betting, they just announced that both our governor and our state legislature was going to start looking at it. Although there is some disagreement there, I will note. Cuomo wants a single operator model where New York is controlling everything. And then the legislature is more for a more traditional multi-operator model with 6 or 7 licenses being given out.
Let's talk potential downside, just so people watching know ETFs don't necessarily stay on the market forever, right? Like what would have to happen? What's like the uncle point as far as timing and is concerned, where you would consider pulling?
So at this point, I can tell you based on the inflows that we've seen day one, which are not yet public because the funds haven't settled, we're not going to consider pulling this fund.
I would presume you're not consider, but I guess it was more of a general question based on like prior funds. Like, is there a point?
The point is below the fund's break even for a sustained period, and different asset managers have different break even points. A lot of the larger players are able to keep ETFs open that are still close to seed, just because a lot of their costs are fixed rather than variable. But for smaller players, there is definitely a break even point that it makes sense to possibly close an ETF. But even then, I think most give it 2 to 3 years before pulling the plug.
Yeah, sort of like the not fun part of the business to talk about there. Someone in the chat asked if it includes audio. Yes, Spotify is in there, Tencent Music, DME is in there. A big part of the fund. I think those two are like over 10%, I believe. Are there any upcoming IPOs that are on your radar for potential inclusion, or SPACs for that matter? I mean, I don't know.
You know, we're always monitoring the universe, and we can't comment particularly on what we might include or not. But there are a lot of new services coming into the public sphere. And this is something that, again, we have the flexibility to at our discretion anytime intra-quarter.
What are like some common attributes you look for in a company for inclusion?
We want to make sure that they derive a substantial portion of the revenue from streaming. Disney is kind of a special one because streaming is not yet there, but the entire valuation of Disney, I think everyone would agree, is reliant on Disney Plus. Either current revenue that's being derived from streaming or prospects to continue growing an existing streaming business. But we do want to see that, and there's other metrics that we track as well, but we want to make sure that the fund is diversified and we can stand by all of the names that we're investing in.
Is there a target allocation as far as different countries are concerned that you want to stay with, or do you have no problem going to a more even allocation across North America and Asia and Europe over time?
There's no explicit target, but I mean, even now the fund is 50% US. I can see it dipping further as new countries come up with their own services. I think it's really important to have a global perspective when it comes to streaming, because cord cutting is not a phenomenon exclusive to the United States.
Yeah. And then same question as far as market cap, right? Right now the fund is like 2/3 large caps. And I mean, that's to be expected.
We define large caps as anything over 5 billion. I guess you have some leeway with how you call large and mid caps, but the median market cap in the fund right now is $10 billion. So it's not mega caps, but it's also not micro caps on average.
Okay. I'm going to ask you a question. I'm not sure if you can answer it, but if you can't, there's a workaround. Do you have a favorite of these? And if you can't answer that, do you have a favorite as far as content is concerned?
I mean, I like everything.
But as far as the content, give me the content.
I can tell you some of the shows I like.
Sure.
Queen's Gambit was fantastic. It's the most watched show on any streaming service ever. It's kind of showing that Netflix is able to create one show for a relatively small budget that propels their market cap by the order of billions of dollars. So content is king, and we want to make sure that all of the companies that are content providers are putting out good content. But just to go back to one of the other names I mentioned, I think in terms of the technology companies that we have in here, so we have a handful of content delivery networks. We have a handful of companies that provide analytics to the large streaming providers, a handful of companies that provide marketing to the large streaming providers. But JStream, again, this is kind of a conglomerate in Japan that does all of those things that a lot of people don't know about.
That's an interesting point. How reliable is the information, the data on streaming, right, on viewership? Because I mean, I don't really think personally maybe that like the traditional cable viewership numbers are that reliable, like the Nielsen data, but how reliable are these numbers? That when you say X million people watched Queen's Gambit, Netflix doesn't even disclose that stuff, right? Unless they choose to. So like, how? Tell me more about this.
So it's kind of a mix of self-disclosures and third parties aggregating the data and putting forward their best guess, call it. Yeah. But at the end of the day, even Nielsen is really kind of guessing when it comes to linear TV.
Right.
I think directionally, the numbers are very reliable. Maybe it's like plus or minus a couple million in terms of how many people actually watch the thing, but I think that they are fairly accurate. I mean, there's firms that are entirely set up to do this kind of thing.
Yeah, that's always been a question, Mike. And then Netflix always says, gives these PRs where they give their viewership. I don't even know what a viewer is. Like, what counts as a viewer?
There's a few different metrics in the industry on how you define a viewer. Daily and monthly are the two most common frequencies. So you'll see DAUs and MAUs to refer to daily active users and monthly active users respectively. I think it's safe if a company doesn't disclose what they're using. They're probably using the widest metric. So someone who logged onto the service and watched a program once per month, call it.
You mean they watched it all the way through, or they just like played it and then 5 minutes later they
it could have been they just played it, but they logged into the service and actively participated in it.
All right, I'll have to do more digging because this always annoys me about the streamers. Netflix is like the because they don't disclose anything, right? It's all up to these third parties. But if you're saying the third party data is accurate, then I guess you would know better than I. That's something I've always found frustrating about this. As much as I love streaming, I don't have cable. I have like 5 of these platforms that are in the fund, right? It's just like don't know. I don't always know if we get the best numbers, but you're saying that the numbers can be trusted, so that's good. All right, Mario, as I'm saying your name correctly, as I would normally say it. Stefanidis is an associate for equity research and portfolio manager at Roundhill Investments. Again, the ticker has been up on the screen the entire time. SUBZ, SUBZ. Can I ask what some rejected tickers were?
SUBZ was kind of the first thing
The only one.
The second New York Stock Exchange said it was available, we jumped on it.
Okay.
I guess another one was STRM, but I think that's taken.
All right, first time is the charm. I wasn't sure if you had any rejected candidates that, because hey, the ticker, catchiness of the ticker can be a big part of this thing, right?
Well, we also love our Z's at the end. We have bets, which ends with a Z. We have subs, which ends with a Z. If you're going to do a 4-letter ticker, have it be catchy.
That's exactly it. All right, Mario, thanks a lot for the time. Super interesting. Again, to my knowledge, well, you said it, the only pure play on streaming, if you want to diversify within the theme, the SUBZ streaming ETF from Roundhill. Thanks a lot, Mario.
Yep. Thanks so much, Spencer.
All right.